I just finished reading this book, Esau Rising. It is about 225 pages, and I found it to be highly important. It's a really insightful read for our day, and I will be reading from one of the chapters, specifically chapter 5. It is titled Accuser of the Brethren. Esau I have hated. Malachi 1:3. Here's a question I want you to ponder. Why did God say he hated or rejected Esau? Did he, without any justification, arbitrarily select Esau as the object of his disdain? Of course not. To do that would be unjust, and that is not an attribute of the Creator. The only explanation that makes any sense is that God rejected Isaac's firstborn because Esau first rejected God. Recall that in the account of Cain and Abel, before Cain murdered his brother, God had encouraged Cain to do what he knew to be right. When Cain's countenance fell after God rejected his offering, God did not tell him, "Tough luck, I don't like you." No, he said, "Why are you angry, and why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Genesis 4, 6 through verse 7. Nothing in that statement indicates that God disliked Cain. He simply admonished him to do what was right, and if he did, his offering would be just as acceptable as Abel's. Unfortunately for Abel, his older brother opted to allow sin to rule in him and over him. Cain killed his brother. As a result, God cursed Cain, but I would argue he did so reluctantly. In reality, Cain had brought the curse upon himself. So if God rejected Cain, it was because Cain first rejected God. Likewise, if God rejected Esau, it was because Esau first rejected God. So understanding Esau's spiritual condition, how is it that Isaac, a patriarch of Israel, who is emblematic of the Messiah, no less, preferred the one whom God rejected? The answer, I believe, lies with this statement, because he ate of his game. Genesis 25:28. On the surface, it sounds as if Isaac preferred Esau because his taste buds longed for Esau's savory dishes. Maybe his preference was tied to the idea that Esau was a man's man who roamed the fields and forests, hunting for wild game. On one level, that may be true, but the Hebrew phrase translated, "he ate of his game," may hint at something more than what meets the eye. Literally, the Hebrew reads, Isaac loved Esau because game was in his mouth. Whose mouth? The Hebrew word translated game here is the same word translated as hunter, zaid, in Genesis 25. You will recall that in describing Esau, the Bible called him a skillful hunter, Yodea Zaid, or literally, he knew trapping, verse 27. So the verse being discussed here could read, Isaac loved Esau because trapping was in his mouth. We would naturally assume that any mouth being referred to would be Isaac's. But what about the possibility that the text could also be telling us that trapping, as in clever and deceitful words, was in Esau's mouth? Because he was a skillful hunter and knew how to set a trap, perhaps he had successfully convinced his father Isaac that he was something that he was not. Remember that the adversary does not come tempting us with sex, drugs, and rock and roll while wearing a red suit and carrying a pitchfork. According to this scripture, he seduces us with what appears good, posing as an angel of light. Genesis 3:6, 2 Corinthians 11:14. Remember that when he first appeared before Eve, he used carefully crafted words, engineered to seduce her away from the truth, that she might believe a lie. You could say that the adversary, who is the father of lies, John 8:44, is accomplished at using his mouth to set a trap. Genesis 3:1 says of him, "Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, Has God indeed said, You will not eat of every tree of the garden?" Eve replied that she and Adam were not to eat of it. To do so would result in death. The serpent countered by saying that they would not die, and that the only reason for God's prohibitions was that he knew that if they ate of its fruit, they would obtain the knowledge of good and evil. Of course, we know the serpent lied. But look at how he was lying. He makes the false statement, "You will not die," with a true one. "You will know the difference between good and evil." He indeed is the father of lies, and as such knows how to make a lie sound like the truth. If you think about it, a convincing lie will always contain a measure of truth, otherwise it wouldn't sound plausible. If the goal is to get people to believe the lie, then it must contain a thread of truth. It has to sound good, feel good, and look good. Sometimes the lie sounds as noble and benevolent that it might convince you that what you're hearing is coming directly from God. Beware, it is a trap. From the beginning, the adversary has always used something that appears to be good and noble to hide the agenda of evil and death. When Satan seduced the woman to partake of the forbidden tree, I can guarantee you he did not show her the deadly aspect of the tree, or else she would have immediately retreated. We would do well to understand that the adversary is a master illusionist. An illusionist wants you to look at the hand that holds the colorful handkerchief or the bouquet of flowers so you won't see what he's doing with the other hand. He uses something that sparkles and glitters to catch your eye so that while you're looking at what he wants you to see, you are entirely unaware what he's really up to. He's crafty, clever, and a master of his game. Likewise, Esau was a skillful hunter and knew how to trap his prey because his spiritual father was the originator of ensnaring the unsuspecting. Apparently, Esau was so good at this form of deception that his earthly father Isaac was enticed into thinking that Esau was worthy of the birthright and the blessing when he obviously was not. Could it be that Esau projected an image based on what he thought his father needed to see? Perhaps he posed as an angel of light? If Esau's very name related to the concept of weeds and tares, then for his father he must have pretended to be the fruitful wheat. In today's world, Esau could even proclaim to be a born-again Christian, when anyone who has eyes to see and ears to hear can plainly discern that he is anything but a true believer. Isaac may have preferred his eldest, Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob, and Rebekah knew something that nobody else knew. Rebekah knew that God had chosen Jacob to carry on the mission first delivered to Abraham. Also, if Jacob had spent a lot of time learning the things of God at some point, he must have realized that Esau was unworthy to bear the distinction of firstborn. And so it happened that Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary." Therefore his name was called Edom. While there is nothing inherently evil about someone craving something to eat after a long day, remember that this is not the first time a desire for something to eat preceded a very bad decision. The pattern started in the garden. On this particular day, so long ago, it would seem the lad had fallen to Esau to repeat that harmful and faithful pattern. When carnal Esau spied Jacob's red stew, his appetite had to be satiated without delay. This impetuous decision would forever brand him as profane and a reprobate, not to mention the eternal enemy of God's people. The expression red stew is translated from the Hebrew ha'edom, or literally the red. Notice that Edom is spelled similarly to the word Adam, which is related to the word that described Esau at his birth, Admoni. Here is another word that is intended to be an eternal descriptor for Esau for all eternity. His descendants will be identified by this name and everything it represents: a carnal, earthy man with selfish tendencies and an unquenchable appetite for what his flesh desires. Jacob, on the other hand, was a temperate man who did not allow his own appetites to govern him. Furthermore, he respected what was regarded as sacred. Those were the things his soul desired, and thus he challenged Esau to sell the birthright to him that very day. "Look," Esau replied, "I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me?" Genesis 25:32. Was Esau really going to die if he didn't eat some of Jacob's red stew? Of course not. But he convinced himself that it was because his carnal appetite was so intense that nothing was too holy or sacred to prevent his desire from being satisfied. So it was that Esau opted to give away what he should have guarded with his life. He traded something holy for what was obviously common and relatively insignificant. I should point out that the birthright of the firstborn conveyed the responsibility to uphold the family name, and in this case to be faithful to and to propagate the covenant God had made with Abraham. To Esau, these things mattered very little, so little in fact that he considered a bowl of soup to be much more valuable. So how did Esau view the heritage that had been handed down to him from his forebears? His reply says it all. It meant nothing to him. That which was holy and sacred was easily discarded to attain short-lived pleasure. That which his father had revered and struggled to preserve, Esau disdained. The shameful attitude toward God defines Esau. I contend that today any person, nation, or society that vilifies what is sacred to God embraces the spirit of Esau, the one God said he hated. Those who despise their God-given heritage and loathe what their fathers fought to preserve exhibit the same deplorable traits that he did. Those who follow in his footsteps are more than willing to trade their sacred birthright for a mess of pottage. They would give away whatever is asked of them, no matter how precious or valuable, to simply be given what their carnal nature desires. They are concerned only for the immediate gratification of their appetites and care nothing for those things that require them to be responsible to a higher calling. As with Esau, these people should also be considered corrupt, profane, and of a reprobate mind. This point must not be underestimated. Our study may examine the lives and times of those who lived long ago, and particularly Esau, but the critical lesson learned from their lives should alert us to what we need to be watching for as we examine our own lives and our present surroundings, so that we may sound the alarm for others. Paul told the Corinthian church that all the things the patriarchs experienced happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the age have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians 10, 11, 12. All that has transpired before us, in part, is to teach us what to do, and, in the case of Esau, what not to do. If we do not heed the lessons God has meticulously laid out for us in his word, then as it was with Cain and Esau, so it will be for us. Sin will be crouching at our door, waiting to pounce. Therefore, we must be on guard, with ears trained to hear the voice of God, and watchful eyes attentive to the snares of the adversary, lest we fall into a trap.